The first time I saw the man who murdered my parents. He was buying a bouquet of sunflowers from a street vendor, his smile as warm and inviting as a summer afternoon. Hey everyone, welcome to Petty Revenge. Comment below where are you watching from. Let's continue the story. I stood frozen on the opposite side of the bustling market, the world narrowing to a tunnel that contained only him. The sounds of haggling merchants, clattering carts, and chirping sparrows faded into a dull, distant hum. My heart, a frantic bird against my ribs, seemed to still entirely. His name was Alastair Finch. For 12 years he had been a ghost, a monster from a childhood nightmare. And now he was here, choosing flowers, his large, well-manicured hand gently testing the petals of a bright yellow bloom. He was older, of course, deeper lines around his eyes, a touch of silver at his temples, but it was unmistakably him. I had studied the single, grainy photograph my aunt had kept from the trial for so long that his face was etched on the back of my eyelids. The strong jaw, the slight crook in his nose from some long-ago break, the way he held himself with an easy, unconscious authority. He looked normal, prosperous even. He wore a tailored linen shirt and dark trousers, not the rags of a fugitive. He looked like a man who had built a life, a comfortable one, while the ashes of the one he'd destroyed were still warm in my memory. The vendor handed him the wrapped sunflowers, and Alastair Finch passed over a few bills with a genial nod. He turned, and for a terrifying second his gaze swept across the crowd and seemed to land on me. My blood turned to ice, but his eyes, a calm, placid gray, slid over me without a flicker of recognition. Why would they? The last time he saw me, I was a sobbing 8-year-old girl hiding in a closet, my small hand clamped over my mouth to silence my whimpers. He moved away, a tall, broad-shouldered figure cutting effortlessly through the throng. The spell broke. Air rushed back into my lungs in a ragged gasp. My mission, the all-consuming purpose that had dictated my every waking moment for over a decade, was no longer an abstract quest. It was real. The target had a face, a gait, a preference for sunflowers. My name is Alara, and for 12 years I have had only one goal: to find Alastair Finch and make him pay. The memory of that night is a film strip of horror I can play in perfect, agonizing detail. It was my birthday. The air smelled of chocolate cake and my mother's perfume, Joy. My father had just finished assembling my new bicycle, a shiny red thing with glittery streamers on the handles. He was a watchmaker, his fingers always faintly smelling of oil and metal. My mother was a pianist, and her laughter was the most beautiful melody I knew. The shouting from downstairs was what woke me. Not the ordinary, raised voices of a disagreement, but a cold, brutal sound that didn't belong in our home. Then, a crash, the sound of shattering glass, the curio cabinet that held my father's collection of antique hourglasses. My mother screamed my father's name, Thomas. And then there was a sound I didn't have a name for then, but now know was a gunshot, muffled by a suppressor. I crept out of bed, my feet cold on the wooden floor, and peered through the banister. The scene below was a distorted tableau. A large man, Finch, stood over my father's prone form. My mother was on her knees, begging, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. I saw him raise the gun again. I didn't see the shot, but I saw my mother's body jerk and collapse. I must have made a sound, a tiny whimper, because his head snapped up. His eyes, those cold gray eyes, locked onto mine. There was no remorse, no shock, only a chilling assessment. He took a step towards the stairs. A siren wailed in the distance, far off but approaching. He hesitated, his gaze flicking from me to the door. With a final, grim look, he turned and fled into the night. The police called it a botched burglary. They said my father, a man who couldn't bear to swat a fly, must have surprised the intruder. The case grew cold. Alastair Finch vanished. My life was packed into a single suitcase, and I was sent to live with my Aunt Clara, a kind but broken woman who wore her grief like a shroud. The grief was a bottomless pit, but it was the helplessness that festered. The image of his retreating back, the knowledge that he had gotten away with it, became a poison in my veins. My childhood ended that night, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Aunt Clara tried to give me a normal life, but I was a ghost in it. While other girls worried about exams and boyfriends, I was in the library, studying criminal psychology, forensic files, and manuals on investigative techniques. I spent my evenings in dank internet cafes, scouring dark web forums and missing persons databases, chasing any whisper, any rumor about a man matching Finch's description. I learned how to fight. I took Krav Maga classes, my small frame hardening, learning to turn weakness into weaponry. I learned to shoot at a remote range, the recoil of the pistol a satisfying jolt of power in my hand. My revenge was not going to be a frantic, emotional act. It was to be a craft. I would be the architect of his ruin. The break came from a debt of the digital age. A former associate of Finch, arrested for cyber fraud, offered information in exchange for a reduced sentence. He mentioned a man he knew as Phineas, a meticulous planner who had done a big job up north years ago and then disappeared. He'd heard Phineas had reinvented himself in a small, sun-drenched country on the Mediterranean, leveraging stolen capital to start a legitimate business. It was the first thread in 12 years. I pulled it. I sold everything I had of value, the few pieces of jewelry my mother left me, my car to fund the trip. I told Aunt Clara I was taking a long-needed vacation. Her worried eyes told me she didn't believe me, but she hugged me tightly and whispered, "Be safe, Alara." And now here I was, in the beautiful, ancient port city of Lysos with its whitewashed buildings and azure sea. And he was here, Alastair Finch, the monster, buying sunflowers. For the next 3 days, I shadowed him. I became a phantom, a whisper in the crowd. I learned his routine. He was a creature of habit, a man who appreciated order. He lived in a beautiful villa on the cliffs overlooking the sea, surrounded by bougainvillea and high walls. But the walls weren't to keep people out, they were for privacy. He wasn't hiding. He was living. He owned a gallery in the old town, a sleek, modern space called the Etha that dealt in contemporary art. It was successful. He was respected. The irony was a bitter pill. He had built this life with blood money. Each morning, he would have an espresso at the same cafe, reading the international news on a tablet. He would then walk to his gallery, spending the day there. In the evenings, he would sometimes dine at a restaurant, always alone, or return directly home. He seemed lonely. It was an observation that infuriated me. He didn't deserve the peace of solitude. He deserved a cage. On the 4th day, I saw the sunflowers again. They were in a simple glass vase on his desk at the gallery. He would look at them sometimes, a strange, almost wistful expression on his face. What did they represent to him? A life he'd taken, a memory he was trying to sanitize. My hatred, a cold, constant companion, now burned with a new, more urgent heat. This man felt sentiment. He had a capacity for something that resembled tenderness. This made his crime even more monstrous. My initial plan had been simple: get close, confirm his identity, and then execute. A bullet in the dark. Quick, clean, final. But watching him, a new, more cruel plan began to form. A bullet was too kind. It was an escape. He had taken everything from my parents, their future, their dignity, their very lives. He had taken my life and replaced it with this hollow vessel of vengeance. He would not simply die. He would lose everything first. He would feel the foundation of his stolen life crack and crumble beneath him. He would understand the depth of his crime just before he paid for it. To do that, I needed to get inside his world. I needed to become someone he would let in. The gallery was the key. I spent a day transforming myself. Out went the practical, anonymous jeans and dark hoodie. I bought a simple but elegant black dress and a pair of good shoes. I styled my hair, applied subtle makeup. I looked older, sophisticated, like someone who might be interested in expensive art. I practiced my story in the mirror until my eyes held a convincing glimmer of casual wealth and curiosity. The bell above the door of the Etha chimed softly as I entered. The interior was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the vibrant heat of the street. Polished concrete floors, white walls, carefully placed spotlights illuminating bold, abstract paintings and strange sculptures. And there he was. Alastair Finch stood near the back, discussing a piece with a young assistant. He looked up as I entered and offered a polite, professional smile. My stomach clenched. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to attack, to do anything but stand there and meet the gaze of the man who had haunted me for half my life. "Good afternoon," he said. His voice was deeper than I remembered, cultured and calm. "Please feel free to look around. Let me know if you have any questions." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and turned to the nearest painting. It was a chaotic swirl of dark colors, slashed through with a single, violent streak of red. It felt like my insides. I heard him dismiss his assistant, and then his footsteps approached me. I could feel his presence behind me, a physical pressure. I focused on keeping my breathing even. "An intense piece, isn't it?" he said. "The artist calls it internal monologue." I turned. He was closer than I expected. I could see the fine weave of his shirt, the tiny scar above his eyebrow I remembered from the photograph. I could smell his cologne, something with notes of sandalwood and citrus. "It's loud," I managed to say, my voice thankfully steady. "It feels like it's trying to say something urgent, but the words are all jumbled." He looked at me with a new interest, his head tilted slightly. "A very perceptive description. Most people just say it's angry." "Maybe it's both," I said, meeting his gray eyes for the first time up close. There was no flicker of recognition, only a polite, professional curiosity. Anger is often just a desperate monologue nobody will listen to. A slow smile touched his lips. It wasn't the cold smirk from my nightmares. It was genuine, intrigued. "Indeed, I'm Alastair Finch," he said, extending his hand. Every fiber of my being recoiled. The thought of my skin touching his made me nauseous. But I smiled, a tight, practiced curve of my lips, and placed my hand in his. His grip was firm, warm. "Isabel," I said, giving him the name I'd chosen. "Isabel Vance." "A pleasure, Isabel. Are you visiting Lyso's?" "Yes, I needed a change of scenery." The lie came easily. "Your gallery is beautiful. You have a remarkable eye." "Thank you, it's my passion." He gestured around the room. "I believe art is the closest we come to making the internal external, to giving form to the chaos within us all." The hypocrisy was staggering. This man who had created such ultimate, final chaos now pontificated about giving it form. I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded. "A beautiful way of putting it." We spoke for perhaps 20 minutes. I talked about art, weaving in half-remembered terms from articles I'd read, careful to keep my comments vague enough to be safe, but insightful enough to be engaging. I was playing a part, and to my horror, I was good at it. He was engaged, charming even. As I prepared to leave, feigning another appointment, he did something unexpected. "Isabel, we're having a small private viewing for a new artist tomorrow evening. There will be wine, some canapes. If you're free, I'd be delighted if you would come." The invitation was a perfect, gaping trapdoor into his world. This was the opportunity I had wanted. So why did a cold dread wash over me? I was a hunter being invited into the lion's den by the lion himself. I smiled, the picture of pleasant surprise. "I'd love to, thank you." "Excellent, 7 o'clock. He handed me a crisp white card. "It will be a pleasure to see you again." I walked out of the gallery into the blinding sun, my heart hammering. The card in my hand felt like a live wire. Stage 1 was complete. I was in. But as I walked back to my small, rented room, a disquieting thought nagged at me. The man in the gallery, articulate, thoughtful, seemingly empathetic, did not align with the brutal monster from my memory. It was a dissonance that was deeply unsettling. Was he truly a master manipulator, a sociopath wearing a human mask so convincing he had almost convinced himself? Or was there something I had missed all these years? The question was a dangerous one. It threatened the foundation of my hatred, the very core of my being for over a decade. I couldn't afford doubt. Doubt was a luxury for those who hadn't seen their parents murdered. I pushed the thought away. The mask didn't matter. Only the face beneath it did. The private viewing was a study in surrealism. I stood in the gallery, a glass of expensive Sauvignon Blanc in my hand, making polite conversation with wealthy expats and local socialites, all while the object of my lifelong vendetta circulated through the room like the gracious host he was. He introduced me to people. "This is Isabel Vance, a wonderful new talent in art criticism." The lie was smooth, effortless. I played my part, laughing at bland jokes, discussing the merits of the new paintings, vibrant seascapes that seemed utterly at odds with the darkness swirling inside me. Throughout the evening, I watched him. I saw how people responded to him. They liked him. They sought his opinion, laughed at his dry wit. He was a pillar of this small community. Tearing him down would not be a private act, it would be a public demolition. During a lull, he found me by a large sculpture made of twisted driftwood. "Not quite to your taste, I suspect," he said, nodding toward the piece. "It lacks the urgent monologue." I smiled. Perhaps it's just more at peace with its chaos. He looked at me, and for a second the polished host facade seemed to slip. I saw a flicker of something else in his eyes, a deep, profound weariness. "Peace with chaos," he repeated softly. "Now that is a rare achievement." He was about to say something else when his assistant approached, looking anxious. "Mr. Finch, a word. It's about the shipment from Milan." He excused himself with an apologetic smile. As he walked away, I saw him subtly rub his temples as if staving off a headache. The gesture was so human, so ordinary. I felt that unwelcome flicker of doubt again. I crushed it. I used his absence to my advantage. Murmuring about looking for the restroom, I slipped past the main crowd and into the back hallway that led to his office. The door was unlocked. The office was neat, organized. Shelves of art books, a filing cabinet, a large, minimalist desk. And on the desk, the sunflowers. Up close, they were even more vibrant. I moved quickly. My goal wasn't to search thoroughly, that would come later, but to plant a tiny, wireless camera I had purchased online. I found the perfect spot, high on a bookshelf, nestled between two heavy volumes on Giacometti. Its lens had a clear view of the desk and the door. I was just smoothing my dress down, my heart thumping when I heard a sound at the door. I froze. It was Finch. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. How long had he been there? Had he seen me? My hand instinctively crept toward the small, sharp knife strapped to my thigh beneath my dress. Fight or flight screamed in my veins. "Looking for the bathroom?" he asked. His voice was neutral. "Think, Alara, think." "I got terribly turned around," I said, forcing a flustered laugh. "This place is like a labyrinth. I ended up in here and was just admiring this piece." I gestured wildly at a small, unremarkable sketch on the wall behind the desk. He looked from me to the sketch and then back to my face. The silence stretched, taut and dangerous. He took a step into the room, then another. He was between me and the door. "It's an early study by Alara Costas," he said, his eyes still on me. "Not very well known, but I've always found her work hauntingly sad." Alara, my name. It felt like a bolt of lightning. Was it a coincidence? A trick? He walked to his desk and picked up a small remote. For a wild second, I thought it was a panic button, but he pointed it at a small stereo system on a shelf, and soft classical music filled the room. He was giving us privacy, masking our conversation from the party outside. He turned to face me, leaning against his desk, arms crossed. The casual posture was a stark contrast to the intensity in his eyes. "Who are you, really, Isabel Vance?" he asked quietly. The game was up. I had been caught. My mind raced through my options. Denial, attack. My fingers itched for the knife. I must have looked terrified because his expression softened slightly. "I don't mean to alarm you. It's just, you don't seem like the others. The art groupies, the wealthy tourists looking for a distraction. You have a depth to you, a weight." He wasn't accusing me of being a spy. He was intrigued. He was lonely, and he saw something in me that resonated. It was a far more dangerous scenario. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I had to lean into this. It was my only way out. "I suppose I'm just a good actress," I said, looking down at my wine glass. "Part of the vacation, you know, trying on a new personality for a few weeks." "And what is your real personality like?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Heavier," I said, meeting his gaze. It was the truth, wrapped in a lie. He nodded slowly, as if he understood perfectly. "I know something about heavy personalities." He gestured to the sunflowers. "My wife loved them, sunflowers. She said they were happiness trying to be serious." The word hit me like a physical blow. Wife. He had a wife. Another life he had built on the grave of mine. She had a way with words, I managed to say. She did. The weariness was back in his voice, a deep, resonant ache. She passed away 2 years ago, cancer. I didn't know what to say. I felt unmoored. The script I had written for this man, the heartless monster living a life of blissful impunity, was crumbling. He was a widower. He lived with a ghost of his own. "I'm so sorry," I said, the words automatic, hollow. "Thank you," he pushed off from the desk. "The party should be winding down. I should get back to my guests." He was dismissing me, retreating back behind his professional wall. The moment of unexpected intimacy was over. As I walked back into the main gallery, my mind was reeling. The camera was in place, but I felt no triumph. The image of Alastair Finch, the grieving widower, was now superimposed over the image of Alastair Finch, the cold-blooded killer. The two refused to reconcile. It was making me doubt my own memories, my own sanity. I stayed for another half hour, then made my excuses. Finch shook my hand, his grip firm and brief. "I hope to see you again, Isabel." "I'm sure you will," I said, and it was a promise. Back in my rented room, I connected my laptop to the camera feed. The office was empty, bathed in the soft glow of a desk lamp. I watched the silent, empty room for a long time, the only movement the gentle sway of the sunflower petals in the breeze from an air conditioner. Who are you, Alastair Finch? I thought, and what really happened that night? The simple, clean revenge I had envisioned was becoming impossibly complicated. To destroy him, I felt I first had to understand him, and that was a path fraught with peril. The days that followed were a strange double life. By day, I was Alara, the vengeful ghost, reviewing the camera footage, following him when he left the gallery, digging into his finances and history through a hired contact back home. By evening, I was increasingly Isabel, the intriguing art lover who found reasons to visit the gallery, to engage him in conversation. Our talks became a strange kind of dance. We discussed art, philosophy, history. He was frighteningly intelligent and widely read. He challenged me, debated me, and seemed to genuinely enjoy the intellectual sparring. I found myself, to my horror, looking forward to it. The line between my act and my real self began to blur. I had to constantly remind myself of the blood, the screaming, the sound of the gunshots. The camera feed yielded little. He spent hours at his desk, working on ledgers, corresponding with artists, on the phone, making deals. He was a sharp, ruthless businessman, but there was no dark secret revealed, no midnight confession to the sunflowers. One evening, he closed the gallery early. "I have something I think you'd appreciate," he said, locking the door. "It's not for public view." My senses went on high alert. Was this it? A private moment where the mask would finally drop. I followed him into the back, to a storage room I hadn't seen before. He keyed a code into a lock, and the door swung open. It wasn't a storage room. It was a studio. Canvases were stacked against the walls, and the air smelled sharply of turpentine and oil paint. They were his. The style was immediately recognizable, dark, tumultuous, emotional. They were the antithesis of the clean, curated art in the gallery outside. These were raw, anguished. One depicted a dark closet door ajar, with a single, terrified eye visible in the crack. Another showed a pair of hands, covered in what looked like black oil or blood, desperately trying to wipe themselves clean on a white cloth. I stood speechless. The chaos he spoke of giving form to, this was it. This was the internal monologue, and it was a scream. "I don't show these to anyone," he said, his voice quiet. He was watching my reaction carefully, vulnerability etched on his face. This was the real him, the man behind the gallery owner, behind the charming host, behind the widower. This was the core. And it was haunted. "They're incredible," I whispered, and for the first time it wasn't a lie. They were technically masterful and emotionally devastating. The pain in them, it's palpable. He let out a long, shaky breath, as if he'd been holding it for years. "It's the only way I know how to breathe," he admitted. "For a long time, I did things I'm not proud of. I made choices that can never be unmade. This is my punishment, to remember, to never forget what I'm capable of." My blood ran cold. This was it. The confession, veiled but clear, he was talking about my parents. What kind of things? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked at me, and his gray eyes were full of a stormy pain I recognized all too well. It was a reflection of my own. The kind that leaves a stain, he said, looking down at his own clean hands. No matter how much you scrub. In that moment, the last vestiges of my doubt were annihilated. He was confessing. He was admitting his guilt, his sin. The art, the grief, the weight, it was all real. But it wasn't redemption. It was self-pity. He felt bad about being a monster, but he was still a monster. He had given himself a life sentence of guilt while my parents had received a death sentence. The sympathy I had begun to feel curdled into a white-hot rage. How dare he? How dare he play the tortured artist, the grieving widower, when he had inflicted the ultimate torture, the ultimate grief, on a child? I had to get out of there. I felt like I was going to be sick. I have to go, I stammered. Isabel, did I upset you? He looked genuinely concerned. No, it's just a lot. Thank you for showing me. It's a profound privilege. I was babbling. I fled the studio, out of the gallery, into the cool evening air. I walked for hours, blind to the beautiful city around me. The plan was back on, but it had mutated. It was no longer enough to destroy his business, his reputation, and then kill him. I had to make him see. I had to hold up a mirror to his art and show him the true face of the monster he painted. I had to become his masterpiece of revenge. I needed to get into his house. I needed to find proof, something concrete I could use to shatter his world before I ended his life. The sunflowers on his desk were a direct link to his wife. His wife was a key. Who was she? How did she fit into his past? My contact back home finally delivered. The information arrived in an encrypted file. I opened it with trembling fingers. Alastair Finch's financials were a web of shell companies, but the trail eventually led back to a large, initial deposit made weeks after my parents' murder. The amount matched what the police believed was stolen from our home. There it was, the blood money. Then I opened the file on his wife. Her name was Lena Finch, née Petrova. There was a photograph. She was beautiful with dark hair and a warm smile. She was a poet. She had died of pancreatic cancer, just as he'd said. And then I saw her date of birth. I calculated it. 12 years ago, when my parents were killed, she would have been 24, the same age as... I scrolled down. The file included her medical history. She had been diagnosed with a rare, aggressive form of cancer 11 years ago. The treatment was experimental, astronomically expensive, and not covered by insurance. The initial deposit into Finch's account had been made just weeks before her treatment began. The pieces slammed together with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a botched burglary. It was never a burglary. It was a hit, a job. My father, the gentle watchmaker, and my mother, the pianist, had been murdered for their money. Their lives were exchanged for cash to fund treatment for another man's wife. The room spun. I stumbled to the bathroom and vomited. The horror was so much more precise, so much more cruel. They weren't random victims. They were chosen. Their lives had a price tag. Their daughter's future had a price tag. And Alastair Finch, the talented, tortured artist, had been the contractor. He had pulled the trigger to save the woman he loved. The moral ambiguity I had struggled with was gone, burned away by this new, horrifying clarity. His guilt was absolute. His pain was the price of his choice, and it was a price he deserved to pay forever. I knew what I had to do. The invitation to his villa came naturally. He called it a dinner to make up for overwhelming me with his dark art. I accepted. The night was clear and warm. The villa was even more stunning up close, modern and elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the sea, now painted with the reflected lights of the town. It was the house that my parents' death had built. He cooked. It was surprisingly domestic. He moved around the open-plan kitchen with an easy confidence, and we talked about everything but the things that mattered. The conversation was a silk sheet over a bed of nails. After dinner, we sat on the terrace with a glass of local brandy. The air was sweet with the scent of jasmine. It was a perfect, beautiful night. It was the perfect night for revenge. "Thank you for this, Alistair," I said. "It's been enlightening." "The pleasure is mine, Isabel," he said, sipping his brandy. "I haven't connected with anyone like this in a long time. You seem to see, well, you see me." "I do," I said, my voice soft. I set my glass down. "I see you very clearly now." I reached into the small clutch purse I'd brought. His eyes followed my movement, still relaxed. He probably thought I was reaching for a cigarette. I pulled out the old, creased photograph, the one from the trial. The one of him 12 years younger, his face hard and cold. I placed it on the table between us. The change in him was instantaneous. All the color drained from his face. The relaxed posture stiffened into stone. His eyes, wide with shock, flicked from the photograph to my face. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant crash of waves on the cliffs below. What is this?" he whispered, his voice ragged. "Look closer," I said, my own voice cold and steady. The persona of Isabel was gone, burned away. Only Alara remained. He picked up the photograph with a trembling hand. He stared at it, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Then, slowly, his eyes rose to meet mine. And this time, they weren't just seeing me. They were seeing the little girl from the staircase. The recognition was a physical blow that made him recoil. "Oh my God," he breathed. "Ilara." "Hello, Alistair," I said. "Or should I call you Phineas?" The name, his old alias, shattered whatever denial he had left. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the stone terrace. "You, all this time it was you." "All this time," I confirmed, standing as well. I was calm. I had never been more calm. "I wanted to see the life my parents bought for you. I wanted to understand the man who thought their lives were a fair trade for your wife." He was shaking his head, backpedaling, his world collapsing in real time. "You don't understand, you can't possibly understand." "I understand everything," I snapped, the calm breaking, my voice ringing with 12 years of pent-up fury. "I understand that you murdered my mother and father in cold blood. I understand that you took their money to pay for Lena's treatment. I understand that you've been living here, playing the respected businessman, the grieving widower, while the blood of my family dried on your hands." Tears were streaming down his face now. It wasn't like that. It wasn't cold blood. "Then tell me," I screamed. "Justify it to me. Explain to me how putting a bullet in my father's chest and my mother's heart was anything but cold." He sank back into his chair, his body crumpling under the weight of my words. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs. I stood over him, my own tears of rage finally falling, hot and furious. After a long moment, he looked up, his face a mask of agony. "It was a job," he choked out. I was desperate. Lena was dying, the doctors gave her months. There was a treatment in Switzerland, a chance, but it cost a fortune I didn't have. A man approached me. He knew about my previous skills. He offered me money, a lot of money, enough to save her." "Who?" I demanded. "Who approached you?" I never knew his name. It was all anonymous. A numbered account, instructions left in dead drops. He gave me the target, your father. "Why?" The question was a torn cry from my soul. "Why my father?" "He said your father had something of his, something he'd stolen, a valuable piece of his wife's jewelry. He wanted it back, and he wanted to make an example of him. He said it was a simple retrieval, but that there could be no witnesses. I was to leave no one alive." The story was insane. It didn't make sense. My father a thief. "You're lying," I spat. "I wish I were," he said, his voice hollow. "I went there that night. I just wanted to get the piece and go. I wasn't a killer, not then, but your father surprised me. He fought me. The gun went off. It was an accident. Then your mother came in, screaming. She saw I panicked. I. He couldn't say the words. He didn't need to. "I looked for the jewelry," he continued, his voice a broken whisper. "I turned the house upside down. I never found it. I took the cash they had in the house, what was in your father's wallet, to make it look like a robbery. And then I saw you, on the stairs, a little girl in a white nightgown. I looked at you and I saw the monster I had become. I couldn't do it. I just ran." He was sobbing openly now, broken by the memory. "I used the money. I saved Lena. We got 11 more years together. 11 years I stole from you. And every single day of those 11 years, I saw your face on the stairs. I painted it, over and over again. That's my punishment. I'm trapped in that house with your parents, blood on my hands, and your eyes judging me. I've been in hell every single day since. I listened to his confession, this torrent of guilt and remorse. It was all true. I could feel it. The accident, the panic, the desperate love for his wife that had led him to damn his own soul. He was a tragic figure. A man who had made a deal with the devil and had been paying for it ever since. And I didn't care. His remorse didn't bring my parents back. His hell didn't fill the hole in my life. His love for his wife did not excuse his destruction of my family. Your punishment, I said, my voice cold and flat, is not enough. I reached into my purse again. This time I pulled out the pistol. It felt heavy and final in my hand. I pointed it at his chest. He looked at the gun, then at my face. He didn't flinch. He didn't beg. A strange peace settled over his features. The peace of a man who has been waiting for this for a very long time. I know, he said softly. Do it. My finger tightened on the trigger. This was it. The moment I had lived for. The culmination of 12 years of pain and planning. Justice. I saw my father's smile as he presented me with the red bicycle. I heard my mother's laughter. I saw the sunflowers on his desk, symbolizing the happiness his wife got to have. My hand began to shake. The gun felt impossibly heavy. He closed his eyes, waiting. And I lowered the gun. He opened his eyes, confused. Ilara. You don't get to escape, I said, my voice trembling with a new, terrible resolve. You don't get to have peace. You said you've been in hell. Good, stay there. I saw the understanding dawn in his eyes. A life sentence. To live with what he'd done, knowing that I knew that I was out there, was a far worse punishment than a quick, absolving death. The man who hired you, I said, backing away towards the door. I will find him, and when I do, I will tell him you talked. I will give him your name, your location. Your hell is just beginning, Alistair. The terror in his eyes was the most satisfying thing I had ever seen. It was better than any bullet. I turned and walked out of his beautiful villa, leaving him alone with his ghosts. I didn't look back. The night air felt different on my skin. The rage that had sustained me for so long was gone, leaving a vast, empty quiet in its place. It was not peace. It was not closure. It was a void. I had my revenge. It was cruel and creative and exactly what he deserved. I had given form to the chaos within me. I had become the artist of his destruction. But as I walked away from the house on the cliff, I realized a terrible truth. I had walked into his gallery seeking to kill the monster of my past. I was walking out having become a monster myself. I had used his own pain as my weapon, and in doing so, I had sacrificed the last piece of the little girl in the white nightgown. My parents were still dead. My childhood was still gone, and I was now the author of a new cycle of pain and vengeance. I reached the edge of the town and looked back at the twinkling lights of his villa, a lone star on the dark cliff. The hook was set. The story of revenge was complete. But as I turned to walk into the unknown, towards the shadowy figure who had truly set this tragedy in motion, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. It was never really about the ending. It was about the ruin you become along the way.